There comes a moment in every man's life when he finally realizes that the world does not reward purity of intention, consistency of effort, or the naive hope that loyalty will be reciprocated simply because it was given generously. Instead, the world bends, quietly, invisibly, and without apology, to the man who understands a simple, brutal, Machiavellian reality. That power in relationships is not held by the one who loves the most, but by the one who is least afraid of losing what he loves. And until a man internalizes this truth, he will spend his entire life mistaking emotional dependence for connection, mistaking responsibility for affection, and mistaking vulnerability for intimacy. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago that human beings are far less noble than they pretend to be, that their loyalty is often a performance, their kindness a negotiation, and their affection a currency traded for comfort, validation, or advantage. He understood, with unsettling clarity, that people rarely commit to what is easy. They commit to what they fear losing, and they revere what stands slightly out of reach. The tragedy is that most men enter relationships by doing the exact thing that destroys their influence. They reveal their intentions too quickly, they give too openly, and they make their devotion obvious before the other person has earned a fraction of it. In doing so, they surrender the one thing Machiavelli swore no prince should ever part with: leverage. The rule is deceptively simple. Never allow your desire to outweigh your discipline, because the moment a woman senses that your emotional need for her exceeds her emotional need for you, the balance shifts, the polarity fractures, and the dynamics begin to tilt in a direction that will eventually consume whatever respect, attraction, or authority you once held. Machiavelli understood that uncertainty is not cruelty. It is a psychological force that keeps human beings invested, attentive, reactive, and emotionally awake. When a man becomes predictable, his presence becomes mundane. When he becomes overly available, his attention becomes expected rather than appreciated. And when he allows his emotions to dictate his behavior, he becomes readable. And once a man becomes readable, he becomes maneuverable. A Machiavellian mind does not express everything it feels, not because it is cold, but because it understands that emotional transparency must be earned, not offered freely like water in a public fountain. This man speaks carefully, not timidly. He offers affection gradually, not impulsively. He remains present, but never clingingly so. He listens more than he explains, and he observes the other person's patterns with the same attentiveness a strategist studies the battlefield. He knows that patience is not passivity but precision, and that silence can dominate a room more effectively than anger ever could. Women respond differently to men like this not because he manipulates them, but because he embodies the very traits that their instincts interpret as strength: self-control, autonomy, emotional sovereignty, and an unshakable sense of direction that does not bend simply because someone else desires it to. She feels drawn to him not because he is withholding, but because he is not governed by neediness. She becomes more intentional with her words, more measured with her reactions, and more considerate with her boundaries because she senses, consciously or not, that this man is not afraid to walk away, and that losing him carries consequences she would rather not face. This is the essence of Machiavelli's rule. The man who can leave at any moment controls the terms of staying, because his presence is a choice, not a dependence. The man who is willing to be alone cannot be manipulated by fear of abandonment. The man who does not collapse under emotional pressure cannot be coerced. And the man who maintains his standards without negotiation becomes the emotional equilibrium that others instinctively align themselves to. Human beings crave stability, but they also crave mystery. They want devotion, but they want it from someone who does not worship them. They want affection, but they want it from a man whose life is not centered around their validation. And here is the deeper psychological truth Machiavelli understood. Relationships are not sustained by intensity, but by tension, specifically the tension created when two people know each other deeply yet still respect the boundaries that protect individuality. The Machiavellian man never dissolves into the relationship. He never loses his ambitions, his projects, his purpose, or his solitude. He remains a world unto himself, inviting someone in without collapsing his entire identity to accommodate them. This independence creates an emotional gravity that cannot be faked, bought, or performed. It is organic, powerful, and felt immediately. When a man masters this rule, his interactions transform. He no longer over-explains his decisions in the hope of being understood. He no longer tries to prove he is different from other men. He no longer chases reassurance because he is centered enough to reassure himself. And he no longer begs for closeness because he understands that proximity bought through desperation always decays into disrespect. Instead, he speaks with a calm confidence, he chooses his commitments deliberately, and he shows affection from a place of abundance, never scarcity. Machiavelli would tell you that the purpose of this rule is not to dominate others, but to ensure that your emotional life is never dictated by people who might change their minds tomorrow. Power in relationships is not about winning arguments or controlling outcomes. It is about governing yourself so well that others instinctively adjust to your rhythm, your standards, your expectations, and your presence. It is about building a life so meaningful that no relationship can become your only source of meaning. And if you want to know why this rule works, why it is timeless, undefeated, and psychologically precise, it is because human beings chase what is stable, scarce, and self-possessed. They move toward the person who is not drowning in their need for connection. They commit to the person whose respect must be earned, not demanded. They remain loyal to the person who does not crumble at the threat of loss. And they love most deeply the person whose love is offered freely but never carelessly. And if you truly let this rule sink into your bones, you begin to realize something even more profound. Control is never about constraining another person. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. It's about understanding that the man who surrenders his standards to preserve a relationship has already lost the relationship, because no woman can respect the man who does not first respect his own boundaries. The moment you compromise your principles to avoid conflict, you plant the seed of your own irrelevance. But the moment you stand firm, calmly, confidently, without hostility, you create an emotional landscape where trust develops naturally, respect grows instinctively, and attraction deepens without force. A Machiavellian man does not shout to assert dominance. He asserts dominance by being unshakable. He does not manipulate with lies. He influences through presence. He does not demand loyalty. He inspires it by being the type of man whose absence is felt more sharply than his imperfections. The relationship becomes an ecosystem orbiting around the values he lives by, not the promises he makes. And the irony is that when you master this type of inner power, you find that people don't just stay. They invest, they commit, they protect, and they elevate the connection because they recognize that losing you is not just losing affection. It is losing a standard that they cannot easily replace. So let this be your final realization. Power is not about how loudly you love, but how wisely you do it. Control is not about withholding affection, but about never allowing someone to become the author of your emotional state. Respect is not demanded. It is mirrored back to you when you hold your frame without flinching. And attraction is not created through effort, but through the quiet certainty of a man who knows that he is whole, with or without anyone beside him. If this message awakens something in you, if it sharpened your perception, strengthened your mindset, or reminded you of the man you were always meant to be, then do one thing. Support the mission. Like the video. Share it so another man can step into his power. And subscribe to the channel for more content that cuts through illusion and gives you the wisdom, strength, and clarity to rise above the noise. Everything you need to transform is here. All you have to do is stay awake.